Raj, I'm interested to know within the context of this, sort of what you personally are pushing for now and how the Generation Food Project is going. Um, and since I think that it has a lot to do with storytelling,
Hmm.
I'm wondering how using that medium confronts or relates to our global food system today and what the objective of this project is.
Well, so the Generation Food Project is something that um, really sort of comes out of a desire to help build the food movement in international ways. I mean, I think that in the United States, the food movement is, I mean, is strong. It's very exciting to see how it has really developed from just 10 years ago. But I think that a dose of internationalism is important, and I think important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not like the US has the monopoly on good ideas. The food movement elsewhere in the world has been going for much longer, and I think it's right and proper that folk in the US are able to look outside for good ideas, and similarly, folk outside the US can see what we're doing here. And so that's what we're trying to do is join up stories from around the world. And we have stories from Cuba, from Japan, from Malawi, from the United States, from Europe. And these stories are sort of super exciting because they do speak to different parts of the food system, everything from how we grow food to the marketing of food to children, to relationships within the home, as I mentioned in the edible education lecture. Those relationships of distribution that happen within the home, I think, are tremendously important. But I mean, it's one thing for me to be a talking head and to witter on about it, and it's another thing entirely to be able to see this unfold. And so I'm very lucky to be working with a director whose work is, I think, I mean, it sort of sets the standard for the way documentaries can and should speak to us through storytelling. And his name is Steve James. He did, I mean, perhaps his most famous film is a film called Hoop Dreams, which is, I mean, it's about basketball and young African-American men in Chicago aspiring to be in the NBA, but it's about pretty much everything else. It's about the American dream, it's about inequality, it's about family, it's about, I mean, it's about masculinity, it's just an incredibly rich, beautiful film. Most recently, he did a film called The Interrupters that was an important landmark study on interrupting cycles of violence. And it's a great privilege to be moving with Steve to look at some of these international stories, because I think the way that we narrate and tell stories about our lives empowers us to think about the future. So I absolutely think that storytelling is important, because if we can change what we think are the standard rules of stories. So instead of thinking about telling a story about how it is that we're going to change the meal that we're going to serve tonight, and think about a story that we're going to about the meal that we serve a generation from now. When we stretch our imaginations around time forward, then we get to play fast and loose with rules that seem rigid right now. And I think that's, I mean, if we're interested in transforming the food system, we're interested in systemic change, then thinking about the next meal is important. And don't get me wrong, I mean, everyone thinks about the next meal, but allowing ourselves the space to tell stories about the future and to hear stories about the past gives us much more latitude with understanding what the rules are and how we might break them so that everyone gets to eat tomorrow. And I think that's one of the things I'm really excited by with this story, with storytelling, but also with this documentary. We're looking at ancient civilizations as well as the sort of bleeding edge of food system thinking in the US and around the world. And by combining these two things together, I think what we're trying to do in the Generation Food Project is really pop open a series of questions that might otherwise have remained closed had we been looking just at the United States and just over the next 5 years or so.